Hi there, I'm Sean Costigan, Managing Director of Resilience Strategy at Red Sift, and I'm here today with Kevin White.
Senior Operation Consultant with Enhanced Information Solutions.
Fantastic opportunity at the Dunwoody College of Technology in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're in the PLC laboratory, and behind us we've got quite a bit of technology. Don't touch that button. I'm pretty sure that I'm not supposed to do that. We're going to have a good conversation today about cybersecurity, about wastewater, and about some of the risks to critical infrastructure that we're seeing en masse around the globe, actually. So we'll start there with just some very basic, it's been the news, wastewater management and cybersecurity come together
Absolutely.
In ways that affect people's health very, very profoundly. So, Kevin, I'm really excited to be here with you and have the opportunity to talk with you about it. So Aliquippa, start there. What happened, what went wrong, and we can maybe just give a bit of a background on.
And this is a symptom more than anything else.
Right.
There's a major underlying issue that we're really looking to address, and this is one example of it coming to the head. The major issue right now is everybody in the cybersecurity landscape is looking on how to put up their defenses.
Mm-hmm.
So water's no different than manufacturing chemicals, power generation, and in these others.
Right.
Have the same vulnerabilities. The differences in water is state agents are coming after.
State agents. Right.
Huge attack. So the water utilities are under-resourced, they're not standardized, and they're having an adversary who's coming at them that's better equipped.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue is that these are repeatable actions across all our water utilities, and the adversaries know this.
Right.
So what we've really got is we've got people who don't really understand the operational technology side. And if we look back historically, information technology cybersecurity has gotten really ramped up in the past several years, right? With your role exactly, I'm sure you see this.
Sure.
Where the experience, the knowledge base, the growth in it. We have not had that same revolution in operational technology.
In the OT end. Right.
In this end.
Right.
Right, where these same devices we need to get access to for our operations, but we need to do it securely. And we have not been securing those in the same way we have some of our information technology.
Right. And it's a growing attack surface at the same time, right? That there are more and more devices connected, right? OT devices connected to.
Absolutely.
Right. And so how do you see that playing out? What's the
So it really has to be a methodology used to figure out how we approach this. And the nice part about it is the frameworks are out there, right? None of this stuff is recreating the wheel. And that's where our biggest recommendations are. Where do we start? It's, well, look at the framework. And NIST has done a phenomenal job of putting together a cybersecurity framework.
Right.
And if you really look at the NIST framework, it's not a path, it's a life cycle, right? It's not just figuring out where you are now, it's how do I clean my backlog and then stay ready for my zero-day attack. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest issues is there are a ton of known vulnerabilities already out there. You can Google them right now and it'll show you every patch that's come across for every PLC out there for how long past. Well, if someone hasn't gone in and patched those are known vulnerabilities that have not been addressed.
Right.
Every day you go not patching those, every day you go not addressing those, that backlog gets bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. So step one is knowing where all that stuff is, addressing that. But then after you clean out your closet, you got to keep the room clean.
Right.
And you've got to maintain, you've got to look forward. And so luckily there's frameworks to do this, but that's the biggest issue right now is to get the house in order and then maintain the house in order. Takes a large number of resources. And especially in the operational technology area, we don't have the knowledge base that's been built the same way it has in information technology, especially when it comes to cybersecurity.
Right, yeah. I imagine one of the big concerns is just knowing the scale of your assets too, and how those are configured. So how does that happen in this space? Like, how do people get to know what they have, what the vulnerabilities are? You mentioned that they're out there, the vulnerabilities
Absolutely.
are well known, but across your attack surface, how do you know what you have and how are those things?
Well, and see, here's one of the nice tools that are out there. Right. And so the tools as addressing problem sets is what I like to do. And EIS focuses on that, right? Because there's a lot of things you could do. There's a lot of tools out there that do a lot of great things. We were actually talking to a customer and said, hey, I want to go find all my vulnerabilities out there. I said, awesome, what do you do once you find them? I don't know.
Right.
Well, okay, well,
prioritize them.
Right, so all these other things you have to do afterwards, right? After you find it.
Right.
The good part with water is step one is an assessment.
Right.
And so AWWA, so the American Water Works Association, right, put together an assessment. And it's actually, the CISA tool for assessments has an AWWA portion in it.
Right.
For the CSNET tool. So you can actually go through and do a federally recognized assessment. It's not an audit. It's a gap understanding where are your opportunities.
It's a self-assessment.
Absolutely it
Right.
is. The issue with it, as we're finding with customers, is unfortunately, yes, it covers everything, but who at our plant is going to implement that, right? Right now, if you look at our municipalities, if you look at our rural water associations, we are not resourced at the plants with either people, skill sets, knowledge base, or time to be able to do these things. And so what's happening is it's not happening. And it's getting pushed further and further down and not happening more and more, which only creates that backlog. Step one to find those parts is an assessment. Because you're absolutely right. In water, we Frankensteined our plants. Why? Was what controls did we put in at this generation? Who was your maintenance manager? Who was your ops manager? How did purchasing go? That is our biggest vulnerability. But step one is find what's out there. And that's part of your assessment is, do you know everything out there and how you get to it?
So with the Aliquippa attack in particular, would that be, is it analogous to a sort of Sputnik moment where people are tuning in now in a way that they didn't in the past, that the vulnerabilities are out there, that you've got non-state and state actors who are thinking about using and exploiting our attack surface, particularly against municipal water and other, and other health related, human health related. So is that a moment, do you think, that is being captured now for politicians and for others in our space to be able to say, we've got to resource this all the way from education through training and all the different pieces to get to the point where we
it's funny you bring that up.
Secure?
The White House just today released 2 governors, watch out for your water and wastewater. That was today.
Right.
I know, I want to say that yes, this is the inflection point, but as I've gotten more into this space, our inflection point was should have been long ago. This is a wow moment, right? And the nice part about it with water is with the funds that are coming out from Department of Homeland Security, from Infrastructure Renewal Act, from these programs, and you're renewing infrastructure, especially key critical infrastructure, that no longer means just brick and mortar programs. That means that data that's contained within these systems that's absolutely important to keep moving forward has to be controlled securely as well. And so it can't be an and OT. And that's really, as you look at it, it can't be IT, OT, and that's where our break's been. And as I talk to our customers, they bring their IT professionals to these conversations, and I say, great, who's your OT side? They said, what is OT?
Right. They don't know.
And that's fine. We know that. So let's not make a whole new thing. Let's do the muscle memory of the audits we're doing, right? Of the standards we use, of the password identifications. Simple tool, and it comes out in every bulletin when we see this, is do you have multi-factor authentication?
Right, are you using MFA?
That's not an OT thing, that's an IT thing.
And what do you see as the, I mean, there's, we don't want to reveal any dirty laundry here, but is that being used? Is MFA?
It's a resource. I will tell you that if you go to a customer and you look at their support crew and their support budget for their IT, that will tell you if they have MFA or not.
Sure. And whether it's being resourced at the right level, right? All right, so I love to talk about this issue, and I mean, I bet you do too.
Absolutely.
Is, how do we get the attention of the people who are going to actually devote their resources to make sure that things like MFA are used? I mean, if it's not called out in a standard or if it's not required, we know that it's important because the bad actors are looking to exploit.
So I think there's a couple different ways. The first one you brought up was standards, right? So the great part about this is we have things in place for critical infrastructure for cybersecurity. My background is in power. So when I was first out of the Navy, I worked as power management. Well, when you do that, you're under FERC and NERC guidance, and they have very stringent controls. Why?
Because failure
is not an option, right? I'm a nuclear engineer by background. You don't get to kind of come close to the right answer. It's either correct or incorrect. If you don't have those standards in place to define what that is, right? And Power did a really good job on that.
A positive containment is still quite frightening.
It's still a bad thing.
A bad thing.
A little leaking is not what you want to hear from your reactor, right? But don't worry, it's not leaking that bad. But when you look at that, that's the same level. If you want to talk about critical infrastructure, that needs to be applied to all critical infrastructure. And so the good part is there's models in place in the SIP standards that NERC has that can absolutely be applied in water. So that's step one. Is I think the standards need to be quickly implemented, right? I think states are slowly going to get there as they get to these assessments. Our goal with doing these assessments is to come up with the common factors. And guess what number one is? There's not policies and procedures in place that identify this stuff. Beautiful. We know where we can work on that. Number two is when I talk to cities and they go, well, where are we going to get the money for this? I said, well, let's talk to your city council about that. Ask which in that city council group wants to be the person on television tonight when they are handing out bottles of water in a civilized nation, in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, where we have more water than we can, where it is cultural and spiritual for us.
We saw this play out in Michigan. We've seen it play out elsewhere.
In Jackson.
Right, exactly.
Any of these places where it's been because of poor management, there's been somebody happen to say, yeah, we knew that. Now, imagine handing those out and going, oh yeah, we couldn't afford MFA.
Right, sure.
That's the other thing about it is, if we're going to talk about criticality, then we need to feel the pressure of criticality, right? And it needs to be brought to that level. And it needs to be communicated in that way, right? We talk about drinking water. The part that we haven't even touched on, right, is all these water facilities feed manufacturing, industrial processes, our hospitals. Where is this water coming from, right? If you really look at what the cost of water was truly associated with, not the commodity price we've put on it, then the security of that water would also match that valuation.
Yeah, especially where we see climate change and drought and other sorts of
water availability will be a huge one.
Yep. So let's pick. I mean, there's so many threads here. We can pick up, but I want to pick up a little bit more on the the Sputnik moment, which is one of the things that bothers me. Is like when they when do people wake up and how do we get them to at the right level? And I can think back in our history. We'll look back at. I remember there was a insider threat. I think it was Australia, a wastewater treatment engineer who decided to go haywire and dump raw sewage. Right. That was one. My own small memory of these things. Another one, of course, the dashboard that goes haywire because somebody's in the system and is messing with the chemicals, right? To see, what's going. And luckily, right, it didn't result in human death.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
So we've had repeated exposure, right, at global examples, right?
Yes.
And yet, here we are. We're not thinking critically in the way, or about criticality in the way that so. How do you get, from whether it's at the municipal level or at the federal level or at the global level, or where do you see it starting to really mesh gears?
So where I did see it just recently, and where this may match up with your Sputnik kind of, when did this open something different, was when the federal government and CISA has these tools and these programs in place because they're in charge of all cybersecurity, everything. And they've always had a list of critical infrastructure. Then they sent out this update, said, hey guys, no joke, this is critical infrastructure. We're now opening this up to you as well. There's 3 areas it brought into. Look across the newspaper, by the way, at any given time, and you'll notice these 3 areas in cyber attacks happen to be popping up more. So the federal government is releasing more tools to address these. 1, K through 12 education. You see that every week about somebody getting a malware hack, a denial of service, or just dispersing all this personal information. Number 2, hospitals. HIPAA information. Imagine also if you go in to get your surgery done and the computer system's down, not good. Number 3, water, wastewater. So the federal government has recognized that we know we've said critical infrastructure, power's got their stuff in line, but when you really look at what gets turned off and what happens, water is at the key of that, right? Healthcare is at the key of that. So the federal government acknowledging that, I believe, will open up more funds. For the state of Minnesota, just went to a conference where the assistant CISO for the state is looking at how do we do whole of state plans. And I think that's really where the opportunity comes in this, is in the same way that these municipalities have gaps and opportunities, we know what they are, right? You and I have already done, without doing an assessment on any of those facilities, could probably name off your 80-20 rule of what are the biggest things you could do right now to at least partially start closing that door. And we know those answers. So the answer is going to have to be, let's standardize that. And it can't just be in Minnesota. We've been talking to Michigan. We've been talking to Wisconsin. It's how do you figure out this model and implant it in place? And who's going to own this? Because this, again, is not a we did the check, we cleaned the closet, it should stay clean forever. We're going to have to be daily, hourly monitoring this. How do we respond as a system? State of Minnesota is really trying to see how to centralize that in an organization, right, that the state now controls us. But again, to get to that point of control, we have to go through the journey. And the journey really starts with that initial assessment of what do you have in place, what don't you? Not to shame, but to find gap analysis that we can group together in funding buckets where we can go, okay, look, you've been taken care of. Your cybersecurity isn't great, but it's way up here. Rural water, guys, who's doing your cybersecurity? What's your password? And they go, well, here's my Post-it note, it's password.
Talk about digital divide.
We need to get you to this point. We need to raise all ships, because the thing about it is your weakest link is where your chain breaks, not your strongest.
Right.
And so if we can identify those weak links and backfill that immediately, that is where these breaks that we're seeing that are little onesie twosies will open into larger things. These systems are not disconnected. These are not completely paper-based systems. These are SCADA control systems. They are integrated with other state systems. There are connection points.
Right.
We don't know them all because we haven't assessed them all.
Sure.
So that's
and
really
people
where
get sick, and potentially. I mean, I was thinking as we were talking about. Probably remember the cryptosporidium Milwaukee, I think it was, incident years ago, where it's just the amount of time that it takes for people to recognize that there's been a problem sometimes can actually be days. So having awareness at the earliest possible point. Okay, so switch gears again. So thinking about risk management, really. Absolutely. About how the big shift that I've seen over the years has not just been to talk about information and communications technologies and cybersecurity or OT and cyber, but to move towards risk management frameworks. And so how do you see that playing out? Do you see the sort of competence level across the board moving in the right direction? Are we seeing progress as people imagine how they prioritize the risks, how they see them, and then they resource them?
That's a great question, and that's, in my opinion, that's part of the break between the IT and the OT world.
Yeah. Because
the way we manage risk. In IT, you are heavy on control, right, and making sure only the right people can get to that at exactly the right minute, right? Now, it may be a pain to get to it. You're fine with that part, but it's going to be protected for those people. In OT, in operations, we need access to that data. And we will take continuity above those other security items. We don't get to say, well, we made it too hard to get to that control panel, so we didn't control the water level. We need it to be that. So that's been, as far as risk management, and the AWA assessment does this actually really fantastic. It's like, well, what do you care about the confidentiality? Well, would it be nice if nobody could come in and find what our layers were? Sure. But really what we need to do is make sure we have access to the data so we can run the system all the time. And that skews your questions. That skews your prioritization when you do that risk management.
Right away.
This is where I think there's a good opportunity, is because those tools are in place, right? Those tools have been utilized by IT for ages, right? And how do we, because you can't go after everything, so they have to do the risk assessment for the prioritization of implemented actions. Those tools, those activities are already in place in the AT world. They need to be implemented into the OT perspective so that it's not new things, it's, oh, that's right. If this goes down, we don't get email out. If this goes down, that plant shuts down the road because they don't have cooling water for their plant.
Right.
So we need to keep that water up. And if that means that maybe one more person can get on to see the data, that's fine. But that's, now we'll control the PLC closer or something of that nature. So how you define those architectures, how you define those scopes is based on what you're trying to do.
Right.
But like I said, I think the good part about it is all those are in place.
The pieces are there.
Absolutely.
It's just bringing them together. I'm hearing you loud and clear on that. So.
And we're going to have to leverage that.
Right.
So if we try to start from scratch with OT, we're going to define OT and how we're going to do, we're going to be way behind.
Way behind.
And the IT cybersecurity world is so well developed, right? It's not a whole different world, right? It's all ones and zeros, right? And once we can get to that point, we can now just change the kind of the prisms through which we look at those ones and zeros.
Right. Let's pick up a couple different threads here. So information sharing, so where you see that headed, and the public-private partnership end of the spectrum. The private sector is involved in water too, right? And as there's a reliance on water, as we mentioned earlier before we started our conversation, right? There's great reliance in industry elsewhere, and it's not just drinking water that we're talking about, or groundwater. It's a variety of things for industrial purposes. So where do you see that playing out in terms of not just the delivery of what they need, but rather where is the public-private partnership things merging? So the people who make the devices, how are they thinking about cybersecurity, and how do they help, further the conversation in such a way that everybody's working together towards the same purpose?
Absolutely, and you bring up a great point, because in OT we're always pushing the edge, right? It's always going to be more devices tomorrow than there were today, and those devices, how they operate with your architecture, can do a bunch of great things for you, but they can also open up vulnerabilities. So as new products are coming out, there are better standards on what they have to meet. But that also means that you now need either a tool or a process in place. You've got
legacy products, excuse me, and other things that may not have those.
May not have those. So one of the interesting parts when we talk as one of the tools is patch management, right?
Right.
Of what you would do in this cybersecurity assessment pipeline. Where you're like, okay, how do you see if a patch is required and how do you implement it?
Right.
Well, in the IT world, right, you guys get patches on Tuesday. I apologize saying
Right.
you.
That's
guys.
right.
The
No,
IT,
that's all right. I'm
the
fine.
IT world.
You can paint me.
It's the IT world. Yeah, looks at it and goes, okay, Tuesday we're going to push these on Thursday.
Right.
It's almost funny because with my OT customers, I know if IT's pushed a push
Right.
on Thursday because they're like, oh my God, everything's broken.
Right.
Because what they hadn't checked on is, does that integrate with the OT network?
Right.
In an OT network, if you implement a patch that you haven't checked that it works for all those 7 different devices from
Yeah.
different generations, and you shut one of those down,
Right.
because those patch does not talk that way, you just shut down operations from a patch,
Yeah.
right? You shut down an overspeed control. You shut down a chemical control. You broke the system from a patch. That's why OT is very, very worried about patches. In the past, those histories have crashed us,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
I
you
can
get
see
burnt
that.
a couple times with that, and your backlog.
Be very
starts
conservative.
Very conservative.
Right. Yeah.
That means that doesn't mean don't do it.
Right.
It means you have to have a plan in place to
Right.
implement that. So to your point, it's got to be a work in progress, because if people are afraid to add new devices because they're adding new vulnerabilities, those devices are a weight on the organization.
Right.
If
Where they should be efficiencies.
Where they should be efficient.
efficiencies.
Absolutely.
Right.
So that's where the integration really comes in, is us understanding, hey, as we continue to add these on, our patch management, now when we're looking at all the different things that'll affect, and so there's actually roughly a 90-day between when you get a patch and when it'll be implemented in operations, because you need to go through and check every version of everything out there to make sure that this works on this patch.
So is there an ISAC for water?
Absolutely there is.
Okay, and what does that look like, and who's
Huge.
who are members?
A lot of municipalities, a lot of governments. In fact, we're actually presenting at the next Water ISAC
Okay.
on system hardening. So
Okay.
Joe Cody from our group is actually going to be presenting on how you close the drapes and shut the door. And it's an analogy for, at the end of the day,
Right.
how you configure your systems to put it in a safe way, and how to use those configurations to really keep your system in a safe place. And it's not a one-time activity, because as you add things and configurations change, you need to verify your expected is actual. And so how do you get into that process? And that's something that maybe OT organizations aren't thinking about. And IT may feel extremely comfortable, like, yeah, we do that all the time. When we asked IT organizations, but do you do that with the plant sign-ins? They go, no.
Right.
Well, that's another access point.
Yeah.
And in the end of it, it's very interesting, because OT belongs to IT.
Right.
Right? It's still under that umbrella. So data security belongs to IT, even in the OT world.
Right.
And so if with the lack of understanding in that area, that's where the other opportunity, I think, is for to go, okay, well, what's down here that we haven't looked at? How do we leverage what we've done already?
Right. And so that can all happen in an ISAC and in other spaces too, I imagine, quite a few different spaces where there's
absolutely. And then you're starting to get in, like we talked about, that standardization, right? And now, whether it's homegrown, right,
Right.
or, and again, like I said, CISA's put out some fantastic tools.
CISA has,
The
right.
tools that are out there, but you also have the knowledge base to use those tools, and that's where we're seeing a large gap. A perfect example is actually if you look through the first line in the AWDA, and I did with a customer who, straight water guy, and is like, yeah, I'm gonna go do this cybersecurity assessment. Cool, let's read the first one together and see if we have the answer.
Right.
He reads it, doesn't understand what it means, asks his local integrator about it, and they're like, yeah, you're good.
Right.
You got a firewall.
Yeah.
And he comes back to me and goes, so he said I'm good because I have a firewall. I was like, that's not what that's asking.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
that's okay, because
okay, but it's a starting point.
it's
for
a starting
conversation.
point.
Right.
But
right.
that's
Wrong
what
answer,
we're
but-
seeing
Right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
That's not a
Yeah.
one-time.
Yeah. So let's cross the Atlantic together for a second.
Okay.
Anything happening in Europe that you see with NIST and a variety of things that have an impact, either for the manufacturers themselves who are working in
Right.
this space because they clearly they're going to have to sell in multiple markets. Is there an impact for the U.S. and for municipal water?
I have not seen any
Yeah.
directly. However, Europe as controllers,
Right.
right, generally coming from
Right.
there, what we're seeing, and we saw this actually from some of the vulnerabilities shown, is when people are getting controllers, engineering firms are getting controllers and kind of packaging together,
Sure.
right, an engineered solution.
Yeah.
The skill sets they use to package those together, a lot of times they leave initial settings in place,
Right.
which leaves a lot of vulnerabilities in
Password
place.
123. Not saying
Not
that's an
saying,
actual
right.
password, but don't use that password.
Again, I know, yeah,
Exactly.
that's my luggage password.
Right, exactly.
And
There it is.
so as I look at that, I go, well, how many of those are out there? And the answer is you actually could find out here before Al Kipple, you could actually log on and see everybody who had
Sure.
these on the internet live.
Yeah.
As far as what Europe's done with some of their regulatory controls on privacy and things of that nature,
Right.
that's where I could see some interesting, right, of data accessibility. Their GDPR's done really good with private data.
Right.
I'm curious where that same kind of control system and regulatory
Yeah.
will roll into their electronic systems, right?
Yeah.
Because anything that can transmit, whether you want it to or not, could potentially be a data transmission device. Again, I don't know if they're looking towards that regulatory,
Yeah.
but that's the only place I would see the real PLC play in here.
Yeah, I think there's maybe, you know, like in Europe, in the EU Cyber Resilience Act, there's quite a bit about secure by design. But most of that seems to be aiming at consumer products. But that
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean they'll only stop there, right? It'll end up
Correct.
right. There's
Well, and really what it comes down to
devices
is,
are devices, endpoints are endpoints,
and people are going to be building these
Right.
things all over the place,
Right.
right? Unitronics was an Israeli company,
Right.
that made really good PLCs.
right. And they're the ones in Aliquippa.
They're the ones that had that vulnerability, and it wasn't because of their device. It was because of the lack of layers that
Right.
left it vulnerable in the first place, and the lack of understanding of how those layers play together.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's pick up on that for a moment, because I
Mhm.
think it might excite people to, you know, we're going to try and entice you, you know, to get into this industry as well a little bit. So the bad actors side of it. So you mentioned, you know, it used to be that it was possible to see vulnerabilities or see all the different problems across dashboards, I presume, for, you know, very good reasons, like convenience of being able to see that. Is that being locked down now? And do you think bad actors are having a harder time, you know, being able to find vulnerabilities in, you know, wastewater and municipal water systems, or because the attack surface is expanding,
It is.
we're opening more doors than we're closing?
It's the attack surface opens, right? And the problem is, if you look at where these gaps are, it's
Right.
because the architecture hasn't been built for use,
Right.
A lot of times it's because the
not
resources
with security
aren't.
in mind necessarily.
Exactly,
Right. Yeah, we've
right.
seen this problem before.
And so, you know, when my group looks at these, where you've got
Right.
live SCADA systems that you want to have remote control over,
Right.
those are kind of just put in place sometimes, right? There's not the structure required, which is, well, how do you make sure someone else doesn't come in and do that,
Right.
Because we want to make it easier so our operator who's doing rounds can do that. And it may not even be outside, it could be across the street where engineers are looking at data on a plant.
Right.
Anywhere where you're transmitting that data, you know, to pull out to look at, is an opportunity, is a vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these systems, the way we used to do it in the past was, cool, we're going to air gap everything, right? You're going to have paper logs, no one can touch your SCADA.
No longer possible, not convenient.
Not desirable.
And,
Not desirable.
Right,
And
exactly.
the thing about it is, right, it's then if you know that, and you
Right.
know that that data and that information is power, is property, is the way you're going to understand the system and is required,
Yeah.
then you protect it, right? And you design the system so that that happens.
Right.
And there are frameworks in place, right? I mean, there's simple tools, like we talked, MFA being one.
Right.
Having an SRA, you know, so secure remote access tunnel, where you brought up surface, you know, attack areas.
Right.
Well, limit it that, right? Give it a gatekeeper, a single that you can then buffer up as much as you want to, and that's what you can control, and people can work through that, right?
Right.
That simple of an idea, again, takes resources to implement, resources to understand, and resources to upkeep. That's not what we're providing our frontline plans.
Right.
And that's really where our gap is.
Okay.
Is we're not putting that out there. So as the threat actors are getting smarter and finding new opportunities and becoming more active, because it is key critical infrastructure, and we've seen this again and again. You've brought up some examples. We won't stop seeing these examples, right? It's not like, oh, good,
Yeah.
we locked it down.
Yeah.
But
Because
we have
there's no
gotta-
perfect security. That's
no
not- that's
perfect
not
security,
right,
but right now, we're not putting the resources, if we believe this is as critical a resource as it is,
Right.
we're not putting the power in place to make sure that we're maintaining that, right?
Yeah,
If people
that's
lost
a-
power every day.
That's I like to talk about the misalignments and misconfigurations.
Absolutely.
These are the two, you know, and today I was talking about that with Red Sift, my company, and my leadership, and how important these things are. So we talked quite a bit about misalignments, whether those are resource misalignments, or we're not there yet with
Right.
standards and guidelines that we're paying attention to, or we're not doing the, you know, attestation that we should be doing, or the testing and, you know, assessments. So thinking about the misconfigurations a little bit. So how do we get people to know, you know, what right looks like in this space, so that they don't, you know, err, you know, to err is human, as we
Right.
say, but, you know, to how we reduce that bit, so we get to the point where they can say, you know, they've done everything they can, you know, reasonably within the priorities and the
Yep.
resources that are aligned, to make sure that misconfigurations aren't an open door for, you know, bad actors, whoever they are. So,
and really, you may find out that, not to say that we wouldn't go after those, but you may find out priority-wise for continuity,
right,
that's okay, because we don't change configurations very much. So actually, what we really care about first is, you know, something else.
Right.
But with those misconfigurations, the best way I think is, again, the standards that come out, and starting with the assessment itself.
Right.
Because it's asking you a question because it's aligned to a requirement.
Yeah.
Right. And so having that reference there that tells you this is what it should look like.
Right.
Is really how I think the standard is going to be set. Right now, again, it's tough because the way we're finding across some states, depending on who owns the water information, it's in some states the Department of Health who's mandating that you have to go do a cybersecurity assessment. In another state, it's the Department of Natural Resources.
Right.
Who says, hey, this water information.
Who owns risk here is going to matter, and what they think the problem is. Right.
So we're talking
right.
between different states. This
right.
is water utilities, so it's
right.
not even different, and they don't have it aligned at the state level who owns this data. So
right.
asking our operators at the front line to figure this up,
yeah.
right, is a very difficult thing.
And water, like electrons, moves across state lines, borders without a right.
Don't have to worry about that, right?
right?
I mean, it's and the part about it is until we see a stoppage of that service, right? And you bring up the misalignment, right? Is we don't pay for that risk, right? Right now, it's a commodity price,
right.
so we expect to have these things,
yeah.
and so
yeah.
That's where I'd say that the misconfiguration. If we can set the standards across state lines,
yeah.
then it becomes okay. How's it supposed to be? Then we can do, again, with the baseline assessment like we're doing with AWA, you go, okay, well, where is your gap?
Right.
And what gap should we go after first? And if we look across the state, what are the levels or milestones we should be ready in this journey?
Right.
So we can all do this together in a standardized manner so that, again, we don't have to worry about who's operating the water plant today. Are they going to remember about this or not? We
right.
need to build it into the entire structure.
Bake it into the structure.
Absolutely.
Right, from the get-go.
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Secure by design, secure by default thinking, right.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And we've got the pattern that works with that, like I said, with power.
Yeah.
And I think it'll happen the same with wastewater, because very closely aligned to clean water, same exact implications and similar systems, right? So you already do there. And if we look across what are each of these, right? Community heating and cooling systems, those are other ones, right? These are key parts of what we expect to be in place at all time, but we don't reinforce them as if we do expect them to be in place all the time.
Sure.
The great part about it is, as utilities, they're very replicable, and since the government already took the first cut with energy, we can distill that and pass it around, I think.
Yeah. Since we're here at Dunwoody College of Technology,
yeah.
You know, we had a little sidebar discussion when we started off, and I think it's worth reinforcing and talking about the training and the education side
Absolutely.
of it for a moment. I mean, you started off in English, right? You
yes.
have a degree in English before you did a degree in engineering. I started off in history before I did, you know, my doctorate in cybersecurity. So there's pathways that are not always the seemingly the direct route
Absolutely.
into cyber, into OT, and a variety of other fields. But where would you recommend people start? I mean, and what sort of skill set and flexibility do you think is necessary to make the changes that you're describing?
And I appreciate the question, because when I go to middle schools and high schools and talk about STEM education,
yeah.
I don't go in with a curriculum list, right? I don't say, well, make sure you get this class, make sure you get this one.
Yeah.
I truly believe that this beginning of us being on the cusp of this is an opportunity and a revolution in how we train and how we teach our next generation of middle class workers, right? This digital transformation that's occurring is bereft of people like us who understand that, who can talk between the physical and the digital.
Yeah.
And that's because, like you said, there is no pipeline for people like us. We come from the most random backgrounds. We are the misfit toys, and we love it.
That's fine. That's good.
But what mentalities, as I look around the group, do we hold in common? Because then that's what it really is. Do we believe that that mentality is intrinsic, or do we believe we can train it? And if we believe that we can train people to be curious and problem solvers, and give them resources, ask them to come to a conclusion, and not say whether it's right or wrong, but whether it met these goals or not.
Yeah. Operate in some uncertainty
and be okay with it.
Be okay with it.
And be, understand and delegate that it doesn't have to be perfect, because 80% is pretty dang good for what we're looking for here.
Right.
And being okay with the failure. And again, I know it sounds like a fluffier curriculum, but it really points to apprenticeships, and it really points to VOTEC, and a hands-on training. And my time in the military showed me that, where we took 18, 19-year-old men and women with no background in this stuff, and those are my technical experts 6-7 months later. So I know it can be done, that when we bring people in and we empower them to learn and not be a feed me person, but I'm part of this, I'm making the decisions here, we unlock amazing potential. And I think that's what this edge is going to need, because we're going to need people who can't be locked down, because we need to get ahead, right? We're talking cybersecurity on the white hat side.
Right. Yeah.
We don't even know what conversations are going on in the black hat side, right? And I'm sure it's not good.
Yeah, and they only have to be right once. And
we have to be right every single day.
Time.
Every single day.
Yeah, people are our greatest asset, and so I think that's really I think that's where we should leave
Absolutely.
off this really wonderful conversation, Kevin.
Awesome.
And it's like a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Great.